How to go from Lightroom Classic into Photoshop and coming back. Lightroom is a great tool to work on your images because you're inside the RAW workflow and you're working on the RAW images. But Lightroom is in its tool set limited, and in special if you want to retouch images, then Photoshop is definitely the better place to work on your images. But you have to leave the RAW workflow and go inside the pixel workflow to work on your images in Photoshop. And because you are switching from the RAW workflow to the pixel workflow, you have to set up a few things in the beginning. And I will demonstrate in this video how you have to set up your Lightroom to work with Photoshop and how you will set up Photoshop that Photoshop will work seamlessly with Lightroom. So let's get started. Now I'm here in Lightroom and I'm in the library model, and you see I'm in a collection, in the retouching collection. And here I have 3 images selected. In the beginning, I want to start here in Lightroom and go to the develop module and just work on the images like always in the RAW workflow. Let's do it like this, okay? Let's say that's okay. Now when I want to go to Photoshop, because I want to do some retouching, I have to right click on my mouse, go to Edit In and use the Edit In Adobe Photoshop 2022 command. Or you can also press on Command and E. If you press on this, Lightroom will send this image over to Photoshop, but there are some things that are going on in the background. But let's wait till Photoshop is ready. Now Photoshop is ready. That's the embedded profile mismatch dialog from Photoshop, and here you have to decide what you want to do, because the embedded space where you will send your image from Lightroom to Photoshop is ProPhoto RGB. The working space in Photoshop is sRGB. So what are color spaces and why do you want to, or why do you have to decide what to do? If you say convert colors to the working space, then the big embedded color space that comes over from Lightroom will convert it into sRGB. If you use the embedded color space that will come from Lightroom, then you're working with a bigger color space than your display can show. So I will use embed profiles now and just press on OK. And now I have the image here inside of Photoshop. And you see I have the raw image, but wait for it. This is just a mismatch, let's say it like this. I have the RGB color space. I have 16 bits per channel. And if you switch here from document size to document profile, you see the profile. Because I use the embedded profile, I have a ProPhoto RGB 16-bit per channel image over here. What I will do right now is just go and add a black bar over her eyes like this. And now I press on save. So Command S and just keep an eye on the file naming. And because I press Command S, now I see Photoshop will save this image as with the image name minus edit.tiff. And if I switch back to Lightroom, you will see I have the TIFF file here inside Lightroom and inside my collection because I came from the collection. Okay, so is a TIFF file okay? 16-bit, the bit size or the bit depth you want to have, and is the color profile an issue? And to all of this, you can say yes or maybe, but I will explain how I would set up my system so I can work as I want to. So first of all, I want to press on the X here in Lightroom to reject this TIFF file, and with a right click I go to the folder in the library, and here I want to delete this TIFF file. So delete from disk. Now I go back to my retouching collection and here my 3 raw files. And now I want to set up Lightroom and how Lightroom will send the images over to my pixel editor, in this case to Photoshop. So I go to the Lightroom Classic menu. On Windows you have to go to the Edit menu and then to the Lightroom Preferences. And herein you can go on the top bar to External Editing. And the standard settings are for file format TIFF, color space is ProPhoto RGB, the bit depth is 16 bits per component, so per channel. the resolution is 240, and the compression, because the format is TIFF, is here set it up to ZIP. Okay, what do I use when I go from Lightroom to Photoshop? I use PSD for my format, and then you see you don't have a compression anymore. And for the color space, because I'm working on an ISO monitor, I use Adobe RGB, and my display can display the Adobe RGB color space. So that's great, because then I see all my colors on my display. The bit depth is 16 bit per component. That's okay. If you don't know what to set up here, 8 or 16 bit, go for the 16 bit per component, because then you have the better bit depth and the file size is bigger, but today the machines or the PCs are fast enough, so that's no problem. So just stay at 16 bits per component. Okay, and the resolution is totally fine with 240, because you're sending over the pixel size, the resolution is not crucial. So I close this, and now I switch to Photoshop, and here in Photoshop I will close this image and go to Edit, and here I will go to the color settings inside of Photoshop. And you see, in my case, I have the RGB working space set it up to sRGB. But as mentioned before, because I'm on an ISO display, I can see Adobe RGB. So I will set up Adobe RGB for my working space. And now Lightroom is sending over Adobe RGB images, and Photoshop is waiting for its color space for Adobe RGB files, and so everything is fine. So let's see. I go back to Lightroom and take this image, edit in Photoshop, will send over to Photoshop, and everything is fine. I don't have a mismatch or anything else. So you see here Adobe RGB files, 16 bit per channel, and everything is fine. If I save this image, you will see that it's saved as -edit.psd, and I can work on this image as usual. So I will create a new layer and just go to my, let's take my retouching tool over here and just start with a small retouching. Nothing big, nothing special, just go over like this. Okay, that's just okay for the purpose right now. So I press on save, press on OK, and this settings or these layers and all my work I've done on this image gets transferred back to Lightroom. So I can close this image over here, go back to Lightroom, and here you now see that I have my PSD file and the -edit, and next to the PSD file I have my original RAW file. So what's now if I now want to edit this image again? I can go with the right click and go to edit in Photoshop, but I can also press Command E and this image will send it over to Photoshop. But now I have a new dialog to work with. What to edit? Do I want to edit a copy? Do I want to edit the original? Or do I want to edit the copy with the Lightroom adjustments? So let's see, for example, I go to the develop module here on the PSD file and set it up to black and white. So I have a black and white treatment here inside Lightroom in my Lightroom catalog put over this PSD file. So everything is fine. But when I now go to edit in Photoshop, Lightroom had to decide, or I have to decide what Lightroom should do. If I edit a copy with the Lightroom adjustment, my layers will be flattened and the black and white setting is baked inside the new PSD file. If I edit a copy, Lightroom will copy the PSD file, sends over the copy to Photoshop, and then I can work on the copy, but without the settings from Lightroom. So I don't see the black and white adjustments that Lightroom laid over this image here. And when I click on Edit Original, I will more or less take the original PSD file underneath all the Lightroom settings and work on this. So I will take Edit Original. So the original file is opened here in Photoshop. All my layers are like I want to have them, so they are preserved. And now I can go in and create a second layer, for example, take my retouching tool and just start to retouch over here like this. Okay. And when I now save the image, Command S, saving the image, and close this image again and go back to Lightroom, then you see the adjustments from Lightroom are still here. I edited this PSD file and all my retouching is still here and all the layers are saved inside the PSD file. Okay, but what is if I want my adjustments inside this image? So I go here to this image, just go to the develop module, open up the shades a little bit, like this, a little bit more exposure and less on the highlights. So I'm working on a raw file. And now I want to go to Photoshop. So I press Command E. This file gets sent over to Photoshop. I can create a new layer and do the retouching. As mentioned before, I just do a quick retouching. So this tutorial is not on retouching, but let's say I want to work like this. Okay. So the retouching is done on this layer. I close this file and save it. So the saved PSD gets sent back over to Lightroom. And if Photoshop is ready, I have here my PSD file inside of Lightroom. And now I can work on my PSD file. For example, I can go to black and white. I can select a profile that gets over this PSD file. I can work on the light as I want to. And when I now go edit in Photoshop 2022, I can decide I want to edit this image inside Photoshop with the Lightroom adjustments. But you see, edit a copy with the Lightroom adjustments. So let's see what happens. I press on edit. Lightroom will create a copy. And now I see that all my layers, so the layers from the retouching, are baked into the original image, and all my adjustments from Lightroom came over as well. So everything is now stored inside this file, but I can't undo the retouching. So if I want to go back, I have no chance because all this editing, all my layers from before are now inside this PSD file. And when I now press on save, you see I get the edit minus edit because the original PSD file with the minus edit was sent over to Photoshop, and because I decided to edit the copy, Lightroom or Photoshop has now added the minus edit.psd. So when I close this image and go back to Lightroom, you will see that I have here my minus edit.psd file. That's the PSD file with all the layers. And on top of these layers, I have all my settings here. And this edit minus edit.psd is the copy, and all the settings are baked into this copy of the PSD. So you have to decide what you want to preserve. I now want to change the minus edit. So I go inside the preferences, go to external editing, and here you can decide how the files get named. So I go inside the templates and press on edit. And now I want to change just MD. I just add the MD, so I know that I have worked on this image. And now I save this file name as a new preset. And that's, let's say, 200 and external editing. That's okay. So I press done. Now I have here my template saved. That's 200 external editing, and now everything gets renamed like this. Okay, if I want to rename this image right now, you see I have the file name minus edit. I can go to the library, here to the metadata, and I can just press here over and say that's MD2. And now I go to the original image before and just rename it here as well. So this renaming is also a renaming directly on the hard drive. So this PSD file in the folder gets renamed as well. Okay, that's cool. So for now, I just went out to Photoshop with a big size file. So PSD, Adobe, RGB and 16 bits per component. And I want to change this. Why I want to change it? Because most of the time I don't need the 16 bits when I go to Photoshop, and 8 bits per component or 8 bits per channel are totally fine for me. So So I can create an additional external editor. And for this, I have to select an application. So here I have to press on choose, go to PSD and take the Adobe Photoshop application. Lightroom asks that I have an application with this name and I want to use it anyway. So that's my Photoshop application for the external editor. I go to PSD as well. I take Adobe RGB and now the bit depth are 8 bits per component or 8 bits per channel, and that's totally fine. But don't forget to save this as a preset. So I go to preset, save current setting as new preset, and now I write PS for Photoshop, PSD for the file, Adobe RGB and 8-bit. And just click on create, and now I have my new preset. And when I now want to edit it with a smaller file size with the 8-bit, I can just right click, edit in, and here I have my new external editor preset, Photoshop, PSD, Adobe RGB and 8-bit. And this file gets sent over to Photoshop. I can create a new layer as before, just do the retouching like this. That's okay. And now I can retouch this as well. So now I can press on save. You see the file name is exactly as I defined it. Close this image, go back to Lightroom, and here I have my 8-bit Adobe RGB PSD file, and that's totally fine for the retouching work. Now you saw you can set up your external editor in any way you like. I have the standard external editor that you can start with Command E with Adobe RGB, PSD, 16 bits per channel. That's okay. And then I have a second editor, an external editor, and that's just with 8-bit per channel. Most of the time 8-bit is totally fine. On my working machine I have lots of other external editors, so I can fastly decide what I want to do with all of my images that I have to edit externally outside of Lightroom. I would definitely love to hear from you what external editors you're using in Lightroom. Just write them down inside the comments. If you like this video, just give it a like. And if you're not a subscriber right now, just press on the subscribe button here inside YouTube, and then you will never miss a new video from me. So, this is everything for today, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao!